Lily ran through the kitchen with the parrot cage banging against her hip, her heart pounding so hard she thought her ribs would crack. "Mama!" she gasped. "You have to come!" Ellen turned from the sink with soap on her hands, and her face went pale because she thought it was Grandma. But Lily shook her head, breath catching. "It's Pepper," she whispered. "Mama, it's Pepper. He knows." Before we go any further, take a second and comment down below where in the world you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. 3 days earlier, the house on Maple Creek Road had felt quieter than it should have. It was the kind of quiet that has nothing to do with sound. Norma Wells was 78 years old and stubborn as the oak tree in her backyard. And for the first time in her whole life, she had stopped singing. Her granddaughter noticed it first, 3 weeks after Norma came home from the hospital carrying a small paper bag with a new bottle of heart medication and a look in her eyes that Lily had never seen before. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like the slow closing of a door. Norma had sung her whole life. Her signature was a simple melody, no proper name, just a handful of notes that curved up and gently down and settled at the end like a bird landing on a branch it trusted. She had sung it so many times over so many years that Pepper, her African grey parrot of 11 years, had grown up inside it. He was grey with a brick-red tail and watchful orange eyes, and he lived in a tall cage in the sunroom at the back of the house, where the afternoon light came in gold and long and slanted across the tile floor. He could say good morning. He could imitate the whistle of the kettle so well that Norma sometimes walked into the kitchen and found nothing on the stove. He was just Norma's bird, steady and familiar. He had never once in 11 years tried to sing. He had heard the melody every day of his life. He simply hadn't offered it back. The change came when Lily's mother, Ellen, sat her daughter down at her own kitchen table across town and explained, in the calm voice grown-ups use when they don't want a child to be scared, that Grandma's heart was giving them trouble, serious enough to mean rest, serious enough to mean careful watching. Lily was 12 years old that spring, tall for her age, and quiet in the way of children who watch adults carefully. She knew what doctors meant by serious. She had heard the word before, when her grandfather Harold had died 4 years ago, and she remembered how the house on Maple Creek Road had smelled that whole winter of cinnamon and lavender, because Norma refused to stop baking, refused to stop putting sachets in the drawers, refused to let grief take a single room from her. Norma had sung through that winter too, every single day. Lily moved into the guest bedroom the weekend after the conversation with her mother. She brought her school books and her hairbrush and a stuffed rabbit she was really too old for but could not sleep without. She was going to be there when Grandma needed her. That was all there was to it. Norma's 79th birthday was coming up on the second Saturday in April, and she had waved it off more than once. "I don't feel like celebrating this year," she'd said, in the small, tired voice that had crept into everything she said since she came home. Lily had heard her tell Ellen the same thing on the phone. "Please, no fuss, no candles, no crowd. I just want a quiet afternoon." 3 days before the birthday, Lily walked into the kitchen looking for her grandmother and found Norma sitting at the table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of her. She was staring out the window at the oak tree in the backyard. She looked smaller than she used to. That scared Lily more than the medicine, more than the doctor's appointments, more than anything else. The sight of her grandmother made small by whatever was happening inside her chest. "Grandma," Lily said softly, "do you want me to warm that up for you?" Norma turned her head slowly and smiled the tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No, honey," she said. "It's fine like it is." Lily sat down across from her. She wanted to ask 1,000 things. She wanted to ask if Grandma was afraid. She wanted to ask why she wasn't singing anymore. She wanted to ask if the melody would come back. But she was 12 years old, And she loved her grandmother more than she loved almost anything in the world, and so she just reached across the table and put her small hand over Norma's papery one. Norma squeezed it once. Then she let go. Lily got up and went to the sunroom to check on Pepper, not because he needed anything, but because she needed a moment to herself where nobody would see her eyes fill. The sunroom smelled like sunflower seeds and warm wood. Pepper was on his top perch, cracking a seed against the metal bar of his cage. He tilted his head at her when she walked in and made the small clicking sound that meant, in his language, hello. She sat down on the wicker chair next to his cage and pulled her knees up to her chest and pressed her forehead against them, and she was just about to let herself cry when she heard it. 3 notes, rising, then 5 notes falling, then again, rising, then falling, settling on the last note like a bird landing on a branch it trusted. Lily lifted her head so slowly it hurt. Pepper had stopped cracking the seed. He was standing perfectly still on his perch, the orange of his eye fixed on the far wall, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. And then he sang it again. The whole melody, from beginning to end, in the exact rhythm Norma had always used, with the same little breath she took in the middle. Lily's mouth went dry. Her hands started to shake. She stood up so fast the wicker chair scraped against the tile, and Pepper looked at her sharply and stopped. "Sing it again," she whispered. "Please, please sing it again." He didn't. She stood there for another full minute, hardly breathing, willing him to open his throat. He preened one wing. He cracked another seed. He said, in Norma's own voice, "Good morning." Then he sang it once more. The full melody curved up and gently down. Lily ran. That is why she came skidding into the kitchen, with the small travel cage banging against her hip, and her hair flying and her heart hammering. Ellen was drying a bowl at the sink, and she turned so fast that soap water flicked across the floor. Her first thought was Norma. Her second thought was Norma. Her third thought was that there was nothing else that could put that look on her daughter's face. Ellen, 38 years old and holding her own family together on will and coffee, dropped the towel. "What?" she said. "What happened? Where's Mama?" Lily shook her head. "She's fine," she said. "She's in the living room. Mama, it's Pepper. He's singing it." Ellen looked at the cage. Pepper stared back at her from the perch inside it, with the mild, curious eye of a creature who does not understand human urgency. "Singing what, honey?" "Grandma's song," Lily said. "The one she stopped. He sang the whole thing twice in the sunroom." Ellen didn't answer for a long moment. She lowered herself onto one of the kitchen chairs the way a person lowers themselves into cold water. She looked at the parrot. The parrot looked at her. Then Pepper tipped his head and sang it. The whole melody right there in the kitchen, sunlight cutting across the counter and picking out the copper of the cage bars. The 3 rising notes and the 5 falling notes and the little breath in the middle, exactly like Norma took. It sounded like Norma. It sounded exactly like Norma. Ellen put a hand over her mouth. "Grandma can't hear it yet," Lily said fast. "It has to be a surprise. It has to be for her birthday, Mama. We can't tell her. We have to make it happen on Saturday." Ellen was crying silently now, the way she cried when she thought no one was watching, and she nodded. She nodded because she couldn't speak, and because in that moment she understood the way mothers understand that her 12-year-old daughter was giving her mother the last gift anyone had left to give. 3 days. 3 days to keep the secret. 3 days to make sure Norma didn't wander into the sunroom and hear him. 3 days to plan a birthday she had already refused to have. That is where the story could have ended. A small, quiet miracle. A parrot who learned to sing. It could have been enough for a lifetime of telling. But it wasn't the whole story. It wasn't even most of it. Because in those 3 days, and in the weeks that came after, the melody Pepper had learned would pull open a door that Norma had been holding shut for more than half a century. And behind that door were things nobody in the family had ever imagined. That evening, after Norma had gone to bed early the way she did now, Ellen sat with Lily at the kitchen table, and they talked about the plan in whispers. "Small gathering," Ellen said. "Nothing tiring. Just us and the Garners from next door. Maybe Pastor Reed if he can slip away after service. A simple cake. Nothing that will make her feel like she owes anybody anything." Lily nodded, but her mind was still in the sunroom. "Mama," she said, "how did he learn it? Grandma hasn't sung in weeks." Ellen looked at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. "Birds are strange, honey," she said. "They hear things, they store them up. Sometimes they don't tell you for years what they've been listening to." She didn't say what she was really thinking, which was that African grey parrots sometimes sang things nobody had ever taught them. She had read once, years ago, that they could pick up tunes from a radio in the next room, from a neighbor's whistle drifting through an open window. They didn't sing on demand. They sang when they felt like it, and they saved certain sounds for certain people. She just didn't want to say all that out loud. Not tonight. They went to bed. The house creaked and settled the way old houses do. The oak in the backyard shifted in the April wind. Somewhere in the sunroom, Pepper tucked his head under his grey wing and slept. The next morning was Thursday. Ellen went out early to buy groceries for the birthday and to stop by the pharmacy for Norma's refill. Lily stayed home. She sat with Norma at the breakfast table and watched her push a piece of toast around a plate without eating it. "Grandma," Lily said carefully, "do you feel like telling me a story today?" Norma looked up. Her eyes were tired, but they warmed a little. "What kind of story, honey?" "The one about your mama," Lily said. "About the song. You never told me where she got it from." Norma held very still. For a moment, Lily was afraid she had said the wrong thing, that she had cracked something inside her grandmother that she couldn't repair. But then Norma set the toast down and folded her hands on the table. "My mama's name was Beatrice," Norma said. "She was born in the winter of 1922 in a little house, not much different from this one, about 40 miles west of here, out past where the county line used to be a rail crossing. She was the youngest of 6. She said her own mother, my grandmother Ruth, used to hum that melody at night when the babies wouldn't settle. Ruth's own mother sang it to her when she was small too. As far back as anybody in our family could remember, that song was there, passing hand to hand like a keepsake. Grandma Ruth wrote it," Lily said. Norma smiled, a real smile this time, small but real. "That's the funny part, honey. Nobody wrote it. Not that I know of. Mama used to say Ruth said her mama sang it to her, and that Ruth's mama said the same thing about her own mother before her. It came down through the women in our family like a set of table linens. Every mother taught the next mother. Every daughter learned it before she could tie her own shoes." Lily thought about that. She thought about how a melody could be older than any of them, older than the oak in the backyard, older than the house on Maple Creek Road, older than every person Norma had ever met. "Why did you stop singing it, Grandma?" Norma looked down at her folded hands for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "Because it was Beatrice's song too, honey. And when the doctor told me last month what he told me, I couldn't sing it anymore. Because I was afraid of who I was going to hand it to, and when." Lily didn't understand every word of that, but she understood the shape of it. She understood the door that was closing. She reached across the table and put her hand over Norma's again. This time, Norma didn't let go. That afternoon, Ellen came home from town and found Lily in the sunroom sitting cross-legged in front of Pepper's cage with a spiral notebook in her lap. Lily was writing something down and reading it back. "Sing it, Pepper," she was saying. "Sing it for me." Pepper cracked a seed and said good morning. Ellen leaned against the doorframe and watched. "What are you doing, honey?" "Trying to figure out how long the song is," Lily said without looking up. "In case we need to know for Saturday." Ellen smiled tiredly and went to the kitchen to put the groceries away. She had bought a small round yellow cake from the bakery on 5th Street and a bunch of white daisies from the grocery. Because Norma always said daisies were honest flowers, she had also picked up a card. She was putting it in the drawer next to the phone when the phone rang. "Ellen," said a voice she didn't recognize. "This is Harlan Voss. I'm calling on behalf of Crescent Heritage Properties. Do you have a moment?" She didn't. She had a birthday to plan, and a sick mother in the next room, and a daughter who was carrying a secret so heavy it was making her small shoulders lift when she breathed. But she said yes, because that was the kind of woman Ellen was, and Harlan Voss started to talk. He talked in the smooth voice of somebody who used the word opportunity as if it were a favor. Crescent Heritage, he said, was very interested in properties in the Maple Creek area. The neighborhood was changing, Mrs. Wells might have noticed. A development company had bought up several older homes on the street already. He understood that Norma was recently ill, that the family might be considering options. He'd like to come by, just to talk. No pressure at all. Ellen thanked him coldly and hung up. She stood at the counter for a long time with her hand on the phone. Something about the man's tone had left a scratch on her. He had known her mother's name without asking. He had known Norma was recently ill. He had said Mrs. Wells, the way a man says a word he has practiced in front of a mirror. She went to the drawer where Norma kept the papers, the bills and the letters and the tax documents, and she opened it. It was worse than she'd feared. There were letters in there that Norma hadn't shown her, notices about the property tax being reassessed on the new value of the neighborhood, notices about a small second mortgage Norma had taken out 3 years ago, quietly, to pay for Harold's funeral costs, notices about the medication co-pays adding up. Nothing was in default, nothing was in emergency. But everything was tighter than Ellen had known, and behind the everything was a house on a piece of land that was suddenly, in Harlan Voss's smooth voice, worth much more than her mother could afford to keep. Ellen closed the drawer very carefully. She did not tell Norma. She did not tell Lily. She sat in the kitchen and drank a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and she thought. That night after Norma went to bed, Ellen went to the sunroom and stood in front of Pepper's cage. "Well," she said quietly to the bird, "what do you know?" Pepper looked at her. His orange eyes were bright. He didn't sing, but he tipped his head. And in a voice that was uncannily like Norma's, he said, "Don't tell the girl." Ellen went cold from her scalp to her ankles. "Don't tell the girl. Don't tell the girl." He said it twice. She sat down hard on the wicker chair. Her heart was banging. Pepper had never in 11 years said that phrase to her. She had never in her whole life heard her mother say those words either. But someone had said them, near this cage at least once, enough times for Pepper to remember. She sat there in the near dark and thought about how many afternoons Norma had spent in this sunroom on the phone. How many conversations she'd had with doctors, with the bank, with people she never mentioned by name. How many times she'd said softly, "Don't tell the girl," meaning Lily, meaning her granddaughter, meaning the child she loved too much to worry. Ellen put her hands over her face and cried. Then she got up. She took a legal pad from the kitchen. She sat back down in front of the Parrot cage, and she started to write down every word Pepper said for the next hour, because she was starting to understand that her mother had been keeping secrets, and that the only witness who had heard them all was a grey bird with a brick-red tail who had never learned to lie. By the time Ellen went to bed that night, she had a page of scraps in Norma's voice, half of them nonsense, half of them not. Pepper had said at various points, "Tell them I'm fine." He had said, "Don't want to worry, Ellen." He had said, "One more year." And he had said, and this one made Ellen's hand shake around her pen, "If you find the box, honey, it's on top of the wardrobe, under the coat." She stared at that one for a long time. The wardrobe was in Norma's bedroom. It was cherry wood and taller than a man, and it had belonged to Norma's mother, Beatrice. Norma kept an old blue coat folded on top of it, one that she never wore anymore. Ellen had assumed the coat was just there because there was nowhere else to put it. She had never thought to look under it. She almost went in that night, almost climbed a chair silently in the dark and took down the coat and looked. But it felt like theft, doing it while Norma slept. It felt like a violation of trust, so she folded the legal pad, put it in her bag, and went to bed thinking about that coat. Friday morning came clear and warm. It was the day before Norma's birthday. Ellen was up early, dressing for a quick trip into town to pick up the flowers she had ordered from the florist. She was in the hallway putting on her earrings when Norma came out of the bedroom in her housecoat, hair in a soft white cloud around her face, and stopped short. "Ellen," Norma said, "I want to tell you something." "Yes, Mama." Norma held onto the door frame with a hand that had gone thin over the winter. "If something happens to me, honey, there's a box on top of the wardrobe, under the blue coat." Ellen stood very still. "Yes, Mama," she said, in a voice she kept level with all her strength. "Just wanted you to know where it is, that's all." Norma turned back into the bedroom and closed the door softly. Ellen sat down on the top step of the staircase and put her forehead on her knees. She did not go to the florist. She called and asked for the delivery instead. Then she stood in the hallway and waited until she heard the shower running in the bathroom off Norma's bedroom. And she went in, and she pulled a chair over to the wardrobe, and she took down the folded blue coat, and behind it, tucked flat against the wood, she found the box. It was small, about the size of a book. It was made of cardboard covered in floral paper, faded pink and green. Ellen had never seen it before in her life. She lifted it down and sat with it on the edge of Norma's bed, and, quietly, she opened it. Inside the box was a stack of things. There were 3 photographs, black and white, curled at the corners. There was a folded piece of sheet music, handwritten, with the melody Norma had always sung inked across 5 bars, the paper the color of old cream. There was a letter in an envelope, the address on the front written in a shaky, old-fashioned hand. There was a small silver ring wrapped in tissue paper. And underneath everything, at the very bottom of the box, there was a cassette tape. Ellen looked at the photographs first. One showed a young woman in a house dress standing in front of a farmhouse porch. The woman had Norma's cheekbones. That was Beatrice. Another showed the same young woman, a little older, holding a baby with the fierce, careful way women hold their first child. The third photograph was of 2 little girls, maybe 5 and 7, standing barefoot on a wooden step. Neither of them looked quite like Norma. Ellen turned that third photograph over. On the back, in the same old-fashioned hand as the envelope, was written, "Norma and Rose, June 1930. Ellen sat very still. She had never in her life heard the name Rose. Norma had said all her life that she was an only child. She had said it so many times, so easily, that it had never occurred to Ellen to ask if it was true. Ellen looked at the photograph of the 2 little girls again. They were holding hands. The older one was smiling at the camera. The younger one, the one Ellen was now nearly certain was her mother, was looking sideways at the older girl with a look of complete devotion. Ellen put the photograph down very carefully. She picked up the letter. The envelope was sealed. On the front, in Beatrice's shaky hand, was written, "For Norma, on her 13th birthday, from Mama." Beatrice had died in 1962, more than 60 years ago, when Norma was still a young woman. Norma had been well past 13 when her mother died, so this letter had reached her long before Ellen was born, which meant Norma had read it and put it away and kept it in this box for the rest of her life. Ellen did not open the letter. It was not hers to open. She picked up the cassette. The label on the front, written in blue pen in a young woman's handwriting, said, "Mama Singing, March 1976. Ellen sat there holding it and could not have said if a minute passed or 10. The shower shut off in the next room. She heard Norma humming faintly through the wall, not the melody, something else, a scrap of a hymn. She put everything back in the box exactly as she had found it, closed it, put it back on top of the wardrobe, laid the blue coat back over it, and left the room on legs that felt hollow. She had the cassette in her pocket. She would have felt guilty if she'd had room to, but she also felt something else, something urgent, something like a doctor holding a chart. Because if there was a recording of Beatrice singing that same melody, and if that recording had been sitting in a box on top of a wardrobe for more than 50 years, then Pepper was not the only one who could sing it back. And if Norma was thinking about that box now, if she was telling Ellen where to find it now, then Norma was thinking about the end of something. Ellen did not have time to think about that. She had a birthday to hold together. She went into town after all. Not to the florist, to the small electronics repair shop on Elm Street, where an old man named Frank kept a shelf of old cassette players in the back, out of pity for people like her. "Frank," she said, "I need to hear what's on this today, please." Frank looked at the cassette, then he looked at her face. Then he took her into the back room without asking any questions. He put the tape in an old dust-colored player and pressed play. For a moment there was only hiss. Then the sound of a room, the clatter of a chair, a woman's voice, brisk and warm, saying, "All right, Beatrice, whenever you're ready." Someone laughed softly. Someone cleared their throat. And then a voice began to sing. It was an old woman's voice, thinned by years but still true. 3 rising notes, 5 falling notes, the little breath in the middle, the melody, exactly as Norma sang it, exactly as Pepper sang it. Ellen put both hands over her face and stood in the back of the repair shop and cried without making a sound, because Frank was a decent man who had his back turned and would pretend not to notice. When the singing ended, another voice came on the tape, a younger woman's voice this time. She said, "Thank you, Mama. That was beautiful." And Beatrice on the tape said, "That's for the birthday, honey. That's for Norma's birthday. Don't lose it." Then Beatrice said one more thing, quieter, as if she were speaking to the younger woman and not into the microphone. She said, "And one for Rose, too, if you find her. You promise me." The tape ended. Ellen stood there in the back of the repair shop with the cassette player humming quietly and the name Rose ringing in her head. "Frank," she said, in a voice that surprised her by being steady, "can you make me a copy of this? On something new, on something I can play tomorrow." Frank had been a father once. He said, "I'll have it for you at 4 o'clock, Ma'am, on the house." Ellen thanked him and drove home on quiet streets. That night, she and Lily sat at the kitchen table again after Norma went to bed, and Ellen told her almost everything. She told her about the phone call from Harlan Voss. She told her about the letters in the drawer. She told her about the box on top of the wardrobe. She told her about the cassette. She did not tell her about the photograph of 2 little girls, because that felt like something that belonged to Norma to say or not say. She told her that Grandma had been keeping secrets, small and large, to protect them. Lily listened without interrupting. Her eyes got bigger and bigger. When Ellen was done, Lily said very quietly, "Mama, we have to play the tape for Grandma tomorrow, when Pepper sings." Ellen said, "Yes, honey, that's what we're going to do." But Lily wasn't finished. "Mama," she said, "what about the man, the Voss man? What if he comes on Monday?" Ellen looked at her 12-year-old daughter and made a decision that she would never regret. "Lily," she said, "tomorrow is Saturday. Tomorrow is Grandma's birthday. Tomorrow no one comes into this house who does not love her. On Monday, we will worry about Monday." Lily nodded, and then something happened that neither of them expected. At about 9:30, when the whole house was dark except the small lamp on the kitchen counter, there was a soft knock at the back door. Not the front door, the back. The door that opened onto the little wooden porch and looked out on the yard where the oak stood. Ellen went and opened it, expecting Norma had left something outside. Instead, she found Wesley Garner from next door, 70 years old, tall and stooped, wearing his old cardigan and holding a plate covered with tin foil. "Wesley," Ellen said, surprised. "What are you doing?" Wesley looked past her into the kitchen. "May I come in for a minute, Ellen? There's something I've been meaning to tell your mother for 2 months, and I don't want to say it in front of her tomorrow." Ellen stepped back and let him in. Wesley sat at the kitchen table. Lily poured him a glass of water because that's what Norma had taught her. Wesley thanked her by name. Then he said, "Ellen, I don't know how to say this in a way that isn't strange, but I've been feeding your mother's Parrot at times when you weren't home, since she got sick. Whenever you all were out, I let myself in with the key she gave us 30 years ago. I sat with him. I gave him seed. I kept him company." Ellen looked at him. "That's a kindness, Wesley," she said. "Thank you." Wesley shook his head. "That's not the strange part. The strange part is what I taught him." He looked down at his hands, embarrassed. His hands had gone spotted and thin, the way old hands do, but they were still the hands of a man who had earned his living making music. "I used to be a music teacher," he said. "Choir, mostly. Elementary and middle school. I retired 8 years ago. My wife and I moved next door to your mother in 1981, and I have been listening to her sing that little melody through the sunroom window every summer for over 40 years. It's a beautiful tune, a little sad. It stayed with me." He swallowed. 2 months ago, when Norma came home from the hospital and stopped singing, I was frightened for her. I don't know if I was more frightened for her or for the tune, because it seemed to me that if she stopped singing it, and if the worst happened, it would be gone, Ellen, gone from this street, gone from the world, and nobody would know it had ever been there. Ellen was starting to understand. "I went in," Wesley said, "on Tuesday afternoons and Friday mornings, when you were at work and Norma was resting or at the doctor, and I sat in front of that grey bird with my old pitch pipe, and I sang the melody to him, note by note, over and over. I know how they learn. I know it takes patience. I did it because I couldn't stand the silence, Ellen, and because if that bird could keep it alive, maybe someday one of Norma's family would hear it again." Lily's hand went to her mouth. Wesley looked up at Ellen with old blue eyes that were wet. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," he said. "I know I should have asked. I just couldn't ask. I was afraid Norma would say no, out of pride, and then it would be gone." Ellen sat down slowly. "He sang it in the sunroom yesterday," she said. "To Lily, twice. He sang it in the kitchen this morning." Wesley closed his eyes for a moment. "Thank God," he said quietly. "Thank God." Then he lifted the tin foil off the plate he had brought. Under it was a small tray of biscuits. "My wife made these," he said, "for tomorrow. She would have come tonight herself, but her knee is bad. We just wanted to be sure you knew, before tomorrow, that he knew the song." Ellen was crying openly now. Wesley Garner reached across the table and patted her hand once, the way an old friend does, and then he got up and let himself quietly out the back door. Lily and Ellen sat at the table without speaking for a long time. Then Lily said, in a very small voice, "Mama." Pepper didn't remember it from Grandma. He learned it from Mr. Garner. Ellen shook her head slowly. "No, honey," she said. "That's not right either. Listen to me. Mr. Garner taught him the tune because he had heard your grandmother sing it for 40 years. It's still Grandma's song. Grandma sang it into that man's ears for 40 years without knowing it. And when your grandma stopped, he gave the song back to the bird so the bird could give it to us." Lily thought about that. "That's a chain," she said finally. "Mama, that's a chain of people." Ellen wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "It's a chain of love, honey. That's all it is." They went to bed. Norma slept badly Friday night. Ellen heard her get up twice for water, moving slowly through the dark hallway, one hand on the wall. The third time, near 5 in the morning, Ellen got up too and went to check on her. She found her grandmother sitting on the edge of her bed with her hand pressed to the middle of her chest. "Mama," Ellen said, kneeling in front of her, "do you need the pills?" Norma nodded once tightly. She was pale. Her lips had gone a color Ellen did not like. Ellen got the pills. Norma took them, one small movement at a time, her fingers trembling. They sat there together in the dark, mother and daughter, until the tightness eased in Norma's chest and she was able to breathe evenly again. "Should I call the doctor?" Ellen said. "Not on my birthday," Norma whispered. "Ellen, honey, not today. Let me have today," Ellen swallowed. "Okay, Mama," she said. "Okay." She helped Norma lie back down. She sat with her until Norma's breathing was regular. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee she did not drink, and stood at the window watching the sky over the oak tree turn from black to grey to the palest pink she had ever seen. The Saturday of Norma Wells's 79th birthday dawned grey and clear, the way important days sometimes do in April, as if the weather itself did not want to distract from what was going to happen inside. The guests were few by design. Wesley and Ruth Garner from next door, Pastor Reed, who had known Norma for 30 years and slipped away from morning service just to sit with them for an hour. A cousin named Marcy, who lived one town over and had driven in that morning with a small basket of blueberry muffins from her own kitchen. That was all. Ellen had cleaned the kitchen. She had put the daisies in a mason jar on the counter. She had put out the yellow cake and the biscuits Wesley's wife had baked and a pot of tea that stayed warm on the trivet all afternoon. Norma came downstairs at 11 o'clock in her blue cardigan, her white hair pinned back with a small clip. She looked frail. She also looked determined. She had put on lipstick. That was her way of saying, "I am still here, and I am still in charge of what I look like when people come to visit me." The Garners came in first. Ruth walked with a cane now, but her voice was warm as ever. She kissed Norma on the cheek and said, "79, Norma, is a young age. You have miles left." Norma laughed, and it was the first real laugh Ellen had heard from her in weeks. Pastor Reed came next. He held Norma's hand in both of his for a long moment and did not preach at her. He simply said, "It is good to see you, sister." Norma said, "It's good to be seen, Pastor." Marcy came last, out of breath, apologizing for the traffic. Norma took her by the shoulders and looked at her carefully and said, "Honey, you look more like your mother every year." Marcy pretended to be offended and then laughed and hugged her. They sat in the living room. They talked. Nothing hard. Nothing about hospitals or medicines or April rains that had washed out someone's garden. They talked about the Braves and the price of gas and a documentary Pastor Reed had watched about early American folk music. Norma sipped tea. She ate half a biscuit. Her color came up a little, and Ellen let out a breath she had been holding for hours. Lily kept looking at her mother. At about 1:45, Ellen stood up. She said, "Mama, before we cut the cake, Lily has something she wants you to see, in the sunroom." Norma looked at Lily. Lily was holding out her hand. "Come on, Grandma," Lily said. "It's a surprise." The whole small party got up and moved slowly to the sunroom. Wesley Garner walked at the back, and Ellen saw him take his wife's hand and squeeze it once. Ruth squeezed back and did not ask what he was thinking, because after 50 years of marriage, there are looks that don't need explaining. The sunroom was full of April light, not the gold of summer, but a clean silver light that lay softly across the tile floor. Pepper was on his top perch. He tilted his head when the group came in and made his small, clicking hello. Lily led her grandmother to the wicker chair. She helped her sit down. Norma looked at the parrot and smiled and said, "Well, Pepper, are you going to say good morning to everyone?" Pepper cracked a seed. Lily glanced at her mother. Ellen nodded slightly. Lily walked to the cage. She opened the small door on the side, the way Norma had taught her. She held out her forearm. Pepper stepped onto her wrist without hesitation, the way he had for Norma every day for 11 years. Lily walked back to Norma. She held out her arm. Pepper looked at Norma with his bright orange eyes. Then he stepped onto her wrist. Norma held very still. She lifted her hand and gently touched the top of his grey head with one finger. He did not pull away. For a moment the sunroom was completely silent. Even Ruth Garner had stopped clearing her throat, and then quietly, in a voice that was small and clear and utterly certain, Pepper began to sing. 3 notes, rising, then 5 notes falling. He paused for the little breath in the middle, and then he sang it again. Norma's face did not break at first. It froze. For 1 full second she looked like a woman who had been struck. Her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes went wide. Then she started to cry. She did not cry the small, silent tears of an old woman who has been taught to be composed in front of company. She cried the way a person cries who has been holding something in for a very long time and finally does not have to. Her shoulders shook. Her chin trembled. Tears ran down her face and dropped onto the front of her blue cardigan. Pepper sang it a 3rd time. He was facing her now. His orange eyes were fixed on hers. He was singing it to her. Ellen was crying. Ruth Garner was crying. Pastor Reed had taken off his glasses. Marcy had both hands over her mouth. Wesley Garner had turned his face slightly toward the window because he was a proud man and he did not want anyone to see. Norma reached out with a trembling hand and brought the bird close to her chest. Pepper tucked his grey head against her shoulder, the way he had done every night for 11 years. "Oh, Pepper," Norma whispered. "Oh, my sweet boy. Oh, my mama." That last word did not fit the moment on the surface of things, but every person in that sunroom understood exactly what she meant. Ellen took a slow breath. Then she nodded to Lily. Lily walked to the small side table by the wicker chair. On it was the cassette player Frank at the repair shop had loaned her mother the day before, along with the copy he had made of the tape. Lily pressed play. The sound of a room came out of the small speaker, the clatter of a chair, a woman's voice saying, "All right, Beatrice, whenever you're ready." A soft laugh. Norma's head came up. And then, from a room somewhere in 1976, more than 50 years past, Norma's own mother Beatrice began to sing. 3 notes rising, 5 notes falling, the little breath in the middle. Norma made a sound that was not a word. It came from somewhere deep. Her mouth was open. She was looking at the cassette player as if her mother were standing there in the sunroom in a house dress and asking her, "Honey, will you set the table?" The tape rolled on. Beatrice's thin, true voice sang the whole melody through once and then twice. And on the 2nd time, in the sunroom on Maple Creek Road, on the 2nd Saturday in April, Pepper joined in. From Norma's shoulder, he sang along. The parrot and the recording, the grandmother and the great-grandmother, the grey bird and the ghost. There was not a dry eye in that room. At the end of the tape, Beatrice's voice said, "That's for the birthday, honey. That's for Norma's birthday. Don't lose it." And then, quieter, the words Ellen had heard the day before. "And one for Rose, too, if you find her. You promise me." The tape hissed and stopped. Norma sat perfectly still with Pepper on her shoulder and her hand over her mouth. Nobody in the sunroom moved. Nobody asked. They were her guests, and they loved her. And they understood that whatever the tape had just said was not for them to touch. Norma took a breath. She lowered her hand. She looked at Ellen. "Honey," she said quietly, "come here." Ellen came. She knelt in front of the wicker chair the way Wesley Garner had knelt earlier, in the same spot, on the same rug. Norma put her free hand on the top of Ellen's head. "There's something," Norma said, "that I should have told you a long time ago." Ellen looked up at her mother. "Yes, Mama, I had a sister," Norma said, "when I was small. Her name was Rose. She was older than me. She was 7 when I was 5, and she died in the summer of 1930. She had a fever, and there was no medicine for it in those days that could touch it, and she was gone in less than a week. My mama never got over it. My mama, until the day she died, believed somewhere in the back of her mind that Rose was still out there, and that if she just sang loud enough at night, Rose would come home." Ellen's eyes filled. "Mama," she said, "why didn't you ever say?" Because I couldn't, honey, because I made a promise when I was 6 years old that I would take care of Mama's memory of Rose, and the way I took care of it was by not talking about her. Rose was my Mama's alone, not because I didn't love her too, because I loved my Mama more than I could stand. She looked around the sunroom. I'm telling you now, Norma said, because I want you to know that when I sing that little song, I have always been singing it for two. For Mama and for Rose. And now Pepper is singing it too, which means Rose has one more voice than she used to. Which means, in some way I do not really understand, my Mama got what she asked for on that tape, and I do not have to carry it alone anymore. She smiled at Ellen. It was a smile that had a great deal of weight taken out of it. Now, she said, somebody bring me some cake. The party moved slowly back to the living room. They ate cake, they drank tea, they laughed at small things. Pepper went back to his cage and started saying good morning to everyone, one at a time, in the exact voice each of them used, which sent Marcy into a fit of laughter that ended with her clutching Norma's arm and saying, "Oh, Norma, oh, that bird." And it might have ended there. A beautiful afternoon, a memory held forever, enough for a lifetime of telling. But the next morning was Sunday, and on Monday morning, Harlan Voss knocked on the front door of the house on Maple Creek Road. Ellen answered. Harlan Voss was in his early 50s, tanned in a way that comes from a tanning bed, wearing a navy blue jacket and holding a folder. He said good morning in his smooth voice and asked to speak to Mrs. Wells. "Mrs. Wells is resting," Ellen said. "You can speak to me." He said, "In that case, may I come in for just a moment? It won't take long." He sat at the kitchen table where Wesley Garner had sat 3 nights before. He opened his folder. He explained, in patient words meant for a woman he assumed did not understand business, that Crescent Heritage Properties was prepared to make a very generous offer on the house. He said the number. It was less than the house was worth. Not by a small margin, by a large one. He said Norma's health situation was, of course, a private matter, but he understood the family might value a clean, simple sale that came with a check rather than the ongoing burden of maintenance, taxes, and, as he understood, some outstanding debt. Ellen sat very still while he talked. Then she asked him one question. "Mr. Voss," she said, "how did you know about the debt on this house?" He blinked. "Well," he said, "public records show, of course, and I only meant that." Ellen stood up. "Mr. Voss," she said calmly, "my mother's second mortgage is not on any public record I know of. It is a private note held by a small bank in Marietta. I would like you to tell me right now how you knew about it." Voss's smile flickered. He recovered quickly. "Ma'am," he said, "I misspoke. I only meant that older homes in this area often carry." Ellen picked up his folder from the table. She flipped it open, quickly before he could react. Inside, on a printed sheet, she saw 2 things she was not supposed to see. She saw her mother's name. She saw the number of the second mortgage, correct to the dollar. And she saw a note in small black letters that said, "Subject expected to be motivated by declining health per source at County Health Services." Ellen closed the folder. She handed it back to Harlan Voss with a hand that was perfectly steady, because she was a mother, and mothers can be very steady when they need to be. "Mr. Voss," she said in the same calm voice, "my mother's medical file is private. If you have obtained information from someone at the county health office, that is a crime. If you offer to buy her home under threat of that information again, I will file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office by the end of the week. I want you to leave this house now and never come back." Voss opened his mouth. He closed it. He got up. He walked to the door. He looked back once and his tan looked less like health and more like paint. Then he was gone. Ellen locked the door behind him. She sat down at the kitchen table with her hands shaking. She sat there for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. She did not call the Attorney General first. She called a woman named Denise Reyes, who had been in Ellen's book club 3 years ago and now worked as a paralegal at a small law firm downtown. Denise picked up on the second ring. "Denise," Ellen said, "I need your help. I need it fast." Ellen told Denise everything. About the phone call, about the folder, about the county health office note, about the offer that was less than half of what the house was worth. Denise, who was 34 and did not suffer fools, was quiet for a long moment. "Ellen," she said, "sit tight. Do not sign anything. Do not answer his calls. I'm going to make some calls of my own. This man's company has a pattern. I have heard the name Crescent Heritage before, and not in a good context. The state has been building a file. Give me until the end of the day." Ellen thanked her and hung up. Then she went into the sunroom, where Norma was sitting in the wicker chair in the morning light, with Pepper on her shoulder, humming very softly to him. Norma looked up and smiled tiredly. "Ellen, honey," Norma said. "Who was that at the door?" Ellen came and sat down on the floor at her mother's feet, the way she had done as a child. She put her head on Norma's knee. "Mama," she said, "it was nobody important. It was a salesman. He's gone." Norma stroked her daughter's hair with a hand that was thinner than Ellen wanted to remember it. "All right, honey," she said. "All right." They sat like that for a long time. Pepper tucked his head under Norma's chin. Somewhere in the neighborhood a lawnmower started. Denise called back that evening. She had good news and bad news. The bad news, she said, was that Crescent Heritage had been quietly buying up properties from elderly homeowners along a whole corridor of small towns for about 3 years. They used the same approach every time. They found people who were sick, alone, or in debt. They offered less than market value. They pressured. In 2 documented cases, they had obtained private medical information through a contact at a county health office. The state had been investigating them quietly for 6 months. The good news, Denise said, was that Ellen's call was exactly what the investigators needed. A living witness, a documented recent contact, a folder with private medical information printed inside. Ellen was, Denise said, the last piece they were waiting for. Ellen closed her eyes. "Denise," she said, "what do I do?" Denise told her. Over the next 2 weeks, while Norma rested and Pepper sang his little melody in the sunroom every afternoon, and Lily finished her final assignments of the school year at the kitchen table, Ellen quietly did everything Denise told her to do. She wrote a statement. She spoke to a lawyer named Regina Powell at the state office. She provided dates and times of the phone calls. She kept her hands clean and her mother out of it. She did not tell Norma. She did not need to. Harlan Voss was arrested at his office in Alpharetta on the 3rd Tuesday in May. He was charged with, among other things, obtaining protected medical information without authorization. 2 other people at Crescent Heritage were also arrested. The company's assets were frozen. Ellen read the small article in the local paper on the porch one morning while Norma was still asleep, and she folded the paper carefully and put it in a drawer and did not show it to anyone. But she called Wesley Garner over that afternoon, and she told him. Wesley sat on the porch and listened, and then he said, "Ellen, your mother chose the right daughter." Ellen laughed and cried at the same time. She had learned from her mother that the two often came together. The following week, on the last Thursday in May, Norma had a bad night. Ellen woke to the sound of a soft thump in the hallway. She got up fast. She found her mother on the floor next to the bathroom door. Norma was conscious, but her face was wrong, and her breathing was labored and shallow. Ellen called the ambulance. Lily woke up and stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her face white as paper. Ellen said, "Honey, get your shoes and get in the car. We are going to the hospital." Norma spent 5 days in the hospital. Her heart, the doctors said gently, was struggling. Not failing outright, struggling. They adjusted medications. They wanted her home in her own bed if she could tolerate it, because at 79, quality of life mattered. On the 3rd day in the hospital, Norma asked for Pepper. Ellen looked at her mother in the narrow white bed. "Mama," she said, "they don't allow animals in the ward." "I know that, honey." Norma said. Her voice was thin, but her eyes were sharp. Bring the tape. Ellen brought the tape. She brought the little cassette player. She and Lily sat by Norma's bed at 3 in the afternoon, and they played the recording of Beatrice singing, softly, so it wouldn't disturb the other patients. Norma closed her eyes and mouthed the words she had never had words for. The melody rose and fell. When it ended, Norma opened her eyes and said, "One more time, honey." Lily rewound the tape. She played it again. The nurse who came in to check Norma's blood pressure stood in the doorway with a chart in her hand and did not interrupt. When the tape ended for the second time, the nurse cleared her throat softly and said, "Mom, that's the prettiest little song I ever heard." Norma looked at her and smiled and said, "Thank you, honey. It's the family's." On the 5th day, Norma came home. She was weaker. Everyone could see that, but she was home. She sat in her armchair by the window and looked out at the oak tree. Pepper sat on her shoulder for hours at a stretch. He did not sing constantly. He sang when he felt like it. He sang once in the morning when the light came in. He sang once in the afternoon when he heard Ellen come home from the store. He sang sometimes for no reason at all, and Norma would close her eyes and smile. Lily stayed. Her school year was almost over. She did her last few weeks of assignments at the kitchen table and slipped upstairs after dinner to read to her grandmother. She read the newspaper. She read cookbooks. She read a small novel Norma had loved when she was Lily's age, about a girl who lived on a farm and had a horse she was not supposed to love as much as she did. One night in early June, Norma called Ellen to her bedside and said, "Honey, there's something I've been thinking about." Ellen sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes, Mama, I want you to teach her the song." "Lily," Ellen swallowed. "Grandma will teach her," she said. "Grandma has years yet." Norma smiled, and her smile was tired but not bitter. "Ellen," she said, "listen to me. I might have years, I might have days. Either way, I don't want to be the last one to know it. I want Lily to know it too, so there's more of us. Do you understand?" Ellen understood. The next morning in the sunroom, in the silver June light, Norma sat in the wicker chair, and Lily sat cross-legged on the floor at her feet. Norma took a slow breath, and, for the first time in months in front of another person, she sang. She sang the 3 rising notes. She sang the 5 falling notes. She took the little breath in the middle. Her voice was thinner than it had been before, but it was there. It was completely there. Pepper, from his cage, sang it back. Lily listened. She hummed along quietly at first. She got the notes wrong the first time, and Norma corrected her gently. She got them wrong again. On the 3rd try, Lily got them right. Norma sang. Lily sang. Pepper sang. The 3 voices wove together in the sunroom, and Ellen stood at the door with her hand over her mouth and did not go in, because some moments should not be watched too closely. Later that morning, Norma called Lily over and asked her to bring the small box from the top of the wardrobe. Lily brought it. She sat with her grandmother on the edge of the bed. Norma opened the box and took out the 3 photographs. She showed Lily her mother Beatrice on the porch of a farmhouse 40 miles west of where they now sat. She showed her Beatrice holding Norma as a baby, and then, very gently, she showed Lily the photograph of 2 little girls holding hands on a wooden step. "That's Rose," Norma said, "my sister, your great-aunt. She died a very long time ago. I never told anybody about her, but I want you to know her name now. So there's one more of us who does." Lily touched the corner of the photograph with the tip of her finger. "Rose," she said carefully, like she was learning a word. "Rose," Norma agreed. They put the box away together. Norma took out the sheet music, unfolded it, and taught Lily how to read the little curling notes. She took out the silver ring, which had been Beatrice's, and slipped it onto the 3rd finger of Lily's right hand, where it was too big and had to be held in place with a bent thumb. "That's yours now, honey," Norma said, "when your finger is big enough." Norma did not open the letter for Lily. She said, "That one is for a different time, honey." Norma Wells lived through that summer. She lived through the fall, too. She saw the oak in her backyard turn amber and then gold and then bare. She saw the neighborhood children go back to school. She saw Lily start 7th grade with a small grey feather she had asked to keep from a molt tucked into her pencil case for luck. She did not last through the winter. She died on a snowy morning in mid-January in her own bed, with Ellen holding one hand and Lily holding the other. Pepper was on the headboard. He did not sing that morning. Birds are strange. They know things. The night before she died, Norma called Ellen close and asked her to bring the box down and to read her the letter. Ellen did as she was asked. She opened the envelope carefully because the paper was thin and brittle after 66 years in the dark, and she read out loud, in the quiet bedroom where the snow was starting to fall outside the window, the words Beatrice had written to a 13-year-old Norma. "My darling girl," the letter began, "on the day you turn 13, I want you to know that you have been the answer to a prayer I did not know how to say out loud. When we lost Rose, I thought I would never sing again. And then you came, and you sang before you could talk. You would lie in your crib and hum the little melody I sang to Rose, and I did not know how you had learned it because I had not sung it in your presence in the year after she died. I think you learned it from her. I think she taught you before she went. That is my private belief, and you may laugh at it if you want to, but that is what I believe. And so, my darling girl, when you sing that little song for the rest of your life, know that you are singing not one voice, but two. Yours and Rose's. Sing it always. Sing it for Mama, too. Yours forever, your Mama Beatrice." Ellen finished reading. Norma had her eyes closed. There was a small tear on her cheek. She was smiling. "There, honey," Norma said quietly. "Now the letter is not alone anymore either. Now 3 of us know it." She squeezed Ellen's hand. She squeezed Lily's hand. She went to sleep. She did not wake up. Norma's funeral was held 4 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon, at the little brick church on 3rd Street, where she had gone every Sunday she was able for the last 30 years. It was well attended. Wesley and Ruth Garner came, though Ruth's knee was bad enough that she needed to sit near the aisle. Pastor Reed spoke about a woman who had made everyone she met feel slightly more welcome in the world than they had felt 5 minutes before. Marcy drove in from the next town with her husband, who Norma had loved and who Norma had said was welcome any time. Denise Reyes came too, quietly, and sat in the back, because she had never gotten to meet Norma Wells, but felt she had known her. At the end of the service, when the small church was very quiet, Ellen walked up to the front. She was carrying the little cassette player. She said, "My mother asked me to play this today. She wanted you to hear it." She pressed play. The old room came out of the speaker, the clatter of the chair, the soft laugh, and then Beatrice's voice, thin and true, singing the 3 rising notes and the 5 falling notes with the little breath in the middle. And then, from the pew where Lily sat with the small parrot cage covered in a light cloth on her lap, Pepper joined in. He sang along softly from under the cloth. And then, in the pew next to Lily, Lily herself sang along in a young, clear voice that had grown up in the sunroom on Maple Creek Road. The recording, the bird, the girl. 3 generations of that song filled the little church, and every person in it, whether they had ever met Norma Wells or not, understood that something rare had just been given to them for free. Ellen stood at the front and looked out at the pews. She had not planned to say anything else, but then she did. "My mother," Ellen said, "taught me many things, but one of the most important was that a song is not a thing you keep. It is a thing you hand over." Her mother handed it to her, and she handed it back. She sang it to a bird for 11 years without ever asking him to sing it back. She sang it out an open window into a neighbor's ears for 40 years without ever asking him to sing it back. And when she stopped, they both sang it back, every single one of them. Ellen's voice caught. She took a breath. "That is the lesson," she said. "That is the whole lesson. Sing your song into the world without asking anything in return. Somebody is listening. Somebody is always listening. And they will give it back to you when you need it." The service ended. People came up to hug her. Wesley Garner held her hand for a long time and did not say anything, because there was nothing left that needed to be said. Ruth patted Lily's cheek and told her she had a beautiful voice. Marcy said, "Oh, honey," and could not finish the sentence. They went home, to the house on Maple Creek Road, which was still theirs, which Norma had left to them free and clear because she had refused in the end to let a smooth-voiced man on a telephone take 1 square foot of it from her granddaughter. The paperwork was clean. The deed was in Ellen's name and Lily's. The second mortgage had been quietly paid down over the summer with money Ellen had scraped together from a small extra shift at her office job and from what remained of Norma's savings. There was nothing left owing. Lily set Pepper's cage in the sunroom. Ellen made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked out the window at the oak tree. The snow had stopped. The branches were bare and black against a sky that was somewhere between white and grey, the kind of sky that only happens in January and only in certain parts of the country. After a while, Lily came in. "Mama," she said, "I want to sing him the song. Is that okay?" Ellen looked at her daughter. "Yes, honey," she said, "that's more than okay." Lily went to the sunroom. She sat in the wicker chair. The afternoon light was clean and silver. It was not gold because it was January, but it was silver and clean, and it lay softly across the tile floor. Pepper tilted his head at her from his perch. His orange eyes were bright. He had lived through 11 summers of the sunroom, and he was, in his own way, part of the house. Lily took a slow breath. She sang the 3 rising notes. She sang the 5 falling notes. She took the little breath in the middle. Pepper listened. Then he sang it back. And in the kitchen, at the table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of her, Ellen heard the 2 voices weaving together through the wall, the way she had heard her mother's voice through the same wall for her entire life. And she smiled, and she cried, and she was not sure where one ended and the other began. Outside in the yard, the oak tree stood in the last light of the day, bare and unhurried, as it had stood for 140 years, since long before any Wells or any Beatrice or any Rose had thought to plant a garden near it. It had heard the melody for over 40 summers through the sunroom window. It would hear it for many more. The house on Maple Creek Road had always smelled like cinnamon and lavender. On that January afternoon, it also smelled like the future. It smelled like something that would keep going. It smelled like a chain of people who had refused to let a good song end. And somewhere in the sunroom, a girl and a grey bird sang together, and a grandmother and a great-grandmother sang with them without being in the room, and a little sister named Rose, who had died on a summer afternoon in 1930, at last had somebody besides her mother remember her name out loud. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment down below about the person in your life who taught you a song or a story you have carried ever since, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And, above all, subscribe to the channel so that the next story we tell is one you never miss. Because there are more of them. There are always more of them. And you deserve to hear every last one.